Armistead Maupin. Welcome to Homotopia 2010.
It's nice to be here.
Thank you for coming back. I think you were last here 2007, I think.
That's right, yeah.
For Michael Tolliver.
Mm-hmm.
And thank you very much for Marianne in Autumn. It's lovely. I thoroughly enjoyed it. It took me back to being 21 when I first read the Tales series in the late 80s. Difficult to talk about because I don't want to give anything away because a lot of people won't have read it yet.
You're too kind. Yeah, thank you for that.
So suffice it to say, the plot is full of some very intricate twists and turns, and I didn't see them coming.
Good. That's what I like to hear.
So what I'd like to ask is, did you have the plot in your head all along? Was this something that you were planning to return to?
Yes. You can actually find a page in Sure of You, the number 6 book in the Tales of the City series that was written in 1989, that sets this up. I don't want anybody to go check Sure of You. You may, but
I'm going to
I'll tell you what page it's on. But it's all there. The mystery that unreels in Marianne in Autumn is set up on one page of Sure of You. So it's taken 21 years for the shoe to drop, but it's finally dropped.
So you didn't have to go back to those books and reread and discover, because in my memory, one of the characters wasn't a particularly significant part of the earlier series, and he becomes very significant in this book. You didn't have to go back and...
Well, I did check just to make sure. I didn't want, because my readers are very diligent and they'll tell me when I slip up. So I did check the crucial scene, if you know what I mean, in that book, in the first book, to make sure that I was being consistent.
So there was a big gap between Sure of You and Michael Tolliver. And I was interested because Michael Tolliver is first-person narrative. You are, or the narrator is Mouse.
Mm-hmm.
This returns to third-person, multiple viewpoint.
Mm-hmm.
I wondered if you'd done that with Michael Tolliver to try and find your way back into those lives again and those characters after such a long gap away. Was that?
No, not really. What I stumbled on Michael somewhat accidentally because I was trying to write a novel. I wanted to write an intimate first-person novel from the viewpoint of a middle-aged man who was surviving AIDS. I felt I was living in the Castro. I saw such people all around me. I had my own discoveries I was making about getting older, and so I was somewhat inspired by Christopher Isherwood's novel *A Single Man*, which was made into a movie last year. I love the notion of someone telling you the story of his life, and I realized I had a middle-aged gay man in my repertoire in the form of Michael Tolliver, and what better thing to say than he was still around, because everyone, myself included, thought that death was imminent when I ended with Sure of You.
Yeah.
So I used him, but gradually the other characters began to sort of audition their way into Michael Tolliver Lives, and so I suppose it sort of got me on my feet again, unintentionally.
Yeah.
And then this time around I had a kind of gothic urge. I wanted to go back to the old storytelling style of being able to shift viewpoints and heighten suspense in that way.
Yeah.
And tell a darker, more twisty, spooky tale.
So did those characters stay alive for you for over 20 years? Did you know what they were doing? I mean, when you sat down, did you have to think all again? Or, well, no, I kind of know where they are.
I kind of knew. I knew that DeDe and Dorothea had settled into a happy marriage and were raising children, because I knew a lot of women like that, And I knew where they'd be living. I knew her life wouldn't change that much. I knew that Marianne had been in Connecticut all those years. So I sort of, and they're all pieces of me, so their personalities are kind of growing and changing with me. I've always kind of bristled a little bit when people say, why did Marianne become such a bitch? That's the question that I get over and over and over again. And since I put a lot of myself into her, I took it kind of personally.
Yeah.
I think she's my, in some ways, she is sort of a slightly darker side of me. Michael's kind of optimistic in a way that I'm not. Marianne thinks about things and ruminates on them and presents a sunny exterior, but is thinking the whole time, judging, as we do.
So do you have in your head, so we've done Michael, we've done Marianne, are there more books?
I sort of miss Brian this time around. He's off in his Winnebago traveling around, being a bachelor, or somewhat of a bachelor. I imagine that he's probably got a lady friend at this point somewhere. But I've always loved him. He's my age exactly. And I think maybe I'll next time around he'll probably figure more prominently.
So you're not working on the next one already?
Not yet. But that feels like the thing I haven't done.
Right.
And he had a very strong friendship with Mrs. Madrigal, and now that she's as old as she is, I can imagine him coming back to spend time with her. You're just hearing me ruminate on the start of what it may be. I don't know.
Right. Because you went away for a long time from the Tales books. Nearly 20 years, was it, between?
Well, let's see. Michael Tolliver Lives was in 2007, and
Sure of You was
89. 80. Nearly 20 years, yeah. I wrote The Night Listener. There were 2 other novels.
Yeah.
And both of them sort of demanded to be written. I had a friend who, a dear friend who died, who was the dwarf actress that played E.T., was inside the E.T. suit in the film. And I loved her and was fascinated by her life and her bravery and her humor. And I wanted to tell a story in her voice. And The Night Listener, which is a psychological thriller, was based on something that actually happened to me, the biggest mystery of my life, really, where I was talking to a boy on the phone that I thought was dying of AIDS, a 14-year-old boy, who was a fan of my books and had written a book himself, and then began to doubt whether or not he even existed, and had to set out on a quest to find out whether he did. And the only way I could get to the truth was by writing The Night Listener and putting it out there and seeing what happened. In some ways, I wrote it for the one person at the center of the mystery. We could talk about it for hours, and I won't do that, but it was a very strange thing. I knew that I was living in the middle of a mystery story.
Yeah.
And I think my storytelling instincts kind of rescued me from some sort of emotional train wreck I might have had if I'd been seriously invested in the need for this boy to exist.
Yeah.
Some people were, and were quite crushed when they discovered the truth.
And they've made a movie of that.
There was a movie made with Robin Williams and Toni Collette, and there was a long piece in the New Yorker and a couple of shows on 2020 in the States that investigated the real story and finally got to the truth. The easiest thing to say is that if you go to my website, armisteadmaupin.com, and check the blog, the Night Listener section has massive amounts of information on it. It's really quite a fascinating story.
Now, because the first 3 of the Tales books were turned into a TV miniseries with Olympia Dukakis.
Yes.
And how do you find your work translated to screen? Do you enjoy it? Do you like it? Did you have much involvement?
I was very lucky on that miniseries because, first of all, Channel 4 in Britain did it, along with Working Title, and they, back then at least, and I presume it's still true, British television people tend to honor the writers more than they do in the States.
Right.
They were quite faithful to the original story. We had a marvelous director, a man named Alistair Reed, and so I could just sit back and watch it happen. They in the end, it's luck when that happens. A lot of writers complain about how they don't recognize their work anymore. I couldn't say that. I felt that it had been fleshed out, actually, in a way that made me very happy.
And were you happy with the movie of The Night Listener as well?
Well, The Night Listener got narrowed into a kind of thriller genre, and I was part of that process. I was one of the screenwriters,
right.
So I can't really walk around and say they screwed up my work. But I've always been, and I think it's a really lovely, disturbing little film that's fun to watch. I think it recently aired here in Britain, and I've gotten some positive response from the people who really didn't see it the first time around because it came and went so fast. But it doesn't contain the enormity of that story, and nor does my novel. That was my single frustration, that this thing was happening around me, and not just to me, but to dozens of other people.
Mm-hmm.
And there was absolutely no way to contain it. If it had happened today, I think maybe it all would have burst onto Facebook, and you could have had some sense of the multifaceted
Yeah.
nature of it.
Yeah.
But I had to focus to write the novel, and even more so to work on the movie, so it didn't really capture it.
And are there other non-Tales books bubbling around that you're...
Not at the moment, but there could be, because I do let my own life govern that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it just pops up out of nowhere, and I see a story that I have to tell. And that could happen next time around, as opposed to a Tales book.
So, when you started writing the Tales, 1974, I think, was the first serializations, was it?
Yeah, there was a weekly serialization in a small California newspaper in '74. And when it became Tales of the City, it was '76 in the Chronicle, the San Francisco Chronicle. But it was the same characters.
So I was thinking about your audience for these books, particularly the new Tales books. For me, it's lovely to go back to them. I read them. I went to San Francisco when I graduated from college, '88. I was 21. I read the books and I was able to sit there and say, "There's Russian Hill," and that was. But also, I was suburban, small town. They were a real eye opener, and there was a great sense of you being a pioneer in terms of what you were writing about. For lots of people, you normalised gay life, and you laid out this whole array of lifestyles which was opening people's eyes. It's quite a different world now in many respects, I hope, for lots of people.
Yeah.
I wonder if you feel that the impetus has changed, that what you're doing with the books is different from that first series?
Well, I'm still getting young people who find the books now, who are just starting out, and who read them all in one big gulp over a month period.
Yeah.
And as you suggested, we hope it's better, but there are still young people who are struggling as teenagers and young adults with being gay. It's very frustrating to think that it's taken this long for the message to get out there, but the depth of homophobia is such that we're always going to be having to fight this battle. And I think it still works in that way on them. And at the same time, for the older generation, it gives us a sense of history, that we have survived and built our families and are where we are today and can remember the earlier days. And so that's been added to the pleasure I get out of it, that I've been writing an epic story of life, gay and lesbian life, as well as some straight characters, over a third of a century, and I've been doing it in real time, so that the references to the moment are all there, and that's a kind of a privilege to be in that position.
Do you like aging? It's obviously a big preoccupation with these books.
I think it would be really bad taste on my part to suggest that to complain about getting old, because I have so many friends that didn't make the journey with me. I've thought about them a lot on this trip, because I had a good friend named Steve Beery who came with me on some of my very earliest book tours in England when I was just staying in the little gay hotel down in Earl's Court, and remembering how he supported me and believed in me and was my friend. We rented a little house in the Cotswolds about 25 years ago. So there are memories for me, and I ache at the thought that they weren't able to come along with me. And I've had that privilege, so I can't complain about it. Obviously, I can complain about the usual aches and pains that go along with getting older, but I'm a very happy man. I'm happily married. I've been with the same guy for the last 6 years, and we were married 2 years ago. And we tell each other that we love each other every day, and we feel that that wonderful peace that comes with knowing you have that other person. And we feel it, I feel it, without the, the guilt and the shame that might have been attached to it when I was a younger person. Because I know who I am, and I know that everything in my life, it all makes sense to me. That the thing that I dreaded the most when I was a teenager, the thing that I feared the most, has now actually been the thing that has made me special and made me put myself out into the world and have something to say.
I was going to ask you about that, because again, I was reading, I was amazed to discover that you actually worked with Jesse Helms.
Yes.
In the 60s, I guess that would have been...
Yes, the late 60s. I was a young conservative. I was a conservative Republican, so I know how those people think. I know how they're determined that they're right in their way. I think it was useful for me in a way to see that people can dig into their own beliefs and not see what other people might be like, not feel empathy with others. But I was also, sort of carried a residual racism with me because I grew up in the South and I was taught. My family opposed desegregation. I remember the days when people used the Bible to justify banning interracial marriage. I think of that when they oppose gay marriage today. People of narrow minds have always tried to limit the realm of love. And the great challenge of Tales of the City is to show the ways in which all sorts of people come together and love each other, and not just in romantic and sexual situations, but just find each other in the world.
Do you think the log cabin Republicans would have been possible 30 years? Is that something new that...
Yes, I think the log cabin Republicans they're exercising a luxury that has been given to them by largely left-wing gays and lesbians who fought to make the world a better place for GOBT folks, And so now they can come in and act as if that's nothing and often bring their greed to bear, basically. That's their argument. It's a financial argument for the most part, I think. It's very funny that they've just endorsed these candidates, these Tea Party candidates, in the belief that they would somehow get their agenda across, and the Tea Party has just turned around and thumbed their noses at them and said, no way, we're not going to oppose DADT, we're not going to do any of the things you want. To hell with you. And I'm not sure what they expected in the first place. I can't look at them without seeing a certain amount of self-loathing. I don't know how you can bury that part of yourself. I don't know how you can be a devout member of the Catholic Church when you hear what the Pope has to say about who you are, or any religion for that matter, that condemns homosexuality. That's the first thing that I would have to toss out of my spirituality, because who I am and who I love is at the center of my being. It's not something that can be, put aside as an incidental consideration.
So you're still very much involved in campaigning and supporting moves towards increasing equal rights or human rights?
Absolutely. I'm an activist. I consider myself an activist. The main thing I do is to write and to put that out, but it gets me out into the world so I can talk about those things. And I was over at the Mormon Temple as soon as Proposition 8 passed in San Francisco, demonstrating with my husband. I think
and that
it's
was
important.
the proposition that...
That was the proposition in California that took away the right of same-sex couples to marry. Christopher and I actually got in under the line. The month before it passed, we were among the 18,000 gay and lesbian couples that actually got married and it sticks. They can't do anything about us. It only applies in California, of course. It's not a federal thing yet, but we're there. And I say on my book jacket that I live with my husband. I introduce him as my husband everywhere I go. That's part of it as far as I'm concerned. I want people to know that this is real to us. And I would be doing that, frankly, had we not made it under the line, because we're married in our hearts anyway, and we're just waiting for the law to catch up with us.
Would you have a message as someone from an older generation
Yeah.
to the younger people in this country today, particularly the people that we're working with at the moment on Project Triangle, who are are trying to change attitudes, are trying to say all hate is bad and you shouldn't hate someone because of their sexuality, their identity, the colour of their skin.
Yeah.
What message would you give those people?
Well, I'd say, first of all, thank you for upholding what have traditionally, or what we should be, so-called Christian principles. That seems like a natural thing, doesn't it? To not hate other people, to accept them, to love them as they are. And I thank them for their bravery, because I wasn't doing that at their age. I didn't come out until I was in my early 30s. So I think there's a great deal of courage involved in what they're doing. I would say you're on entirely the right track. You're helping your brothers and sisters who aren't there yet by being an example, because your visibility is enormously important. It's the single thing. And back when I started Tales of the City, that's all I ever spoke about, and my contemporary Harvey Milk, who was a friend of mine, said the same thing: come out, because nothing has the power of that. Nothing. No politics has the power of that, because coming out affects the people around you, your family and your friends. When Christopher and I were married, our very right-wing Republican brothers and their families came out to California and were present at the wedding. And I think in many ways it was the final convincing that they need just to see us declare our love for each other in a public way. So I thank those kids enormously for being, they're my heroes, that they're behaving that way. And I think that they're going to find that that's going to bring success and love and everything they want into their lives simply by being themselves. One of the things I noticed about coming out was it really makes it clear to you who the bastards in your life are, if I may be that blunt about it. It's very clear. If they can't deal with it, you don't need them in your life, because they don't have the kind of heart and understanding and intelligence, really. And intelligence, it's really about looking around you and seeing how the world works. They don't have that. And you will find those people if you're honest about who you are and if you fight for your rights, which they're doing. So, bravo.
Thank you. That's it.